Isn't it incredible to think that sometimes we can almost hold a piece of the distant past, something dug up that gives us a real, tangible link to people who lived, what, millennia ago, their lives, maybe even their beliefs?
It really is. And that's exactly what we're focusing on today. A truly remarkable discovery from the South Caucasus, this newly found human figurine.
A direct connection, yeah. So our deep dive is all about this fascinating little object found in Damjili Cave over in western Azerbaijan. And what makes this one so special, right? Why are we giving it our full attention?
Well, the key thing is, this small sandstone figure is the very first of its kind found in the South Caucasus that comes from a securely radiocarbon-dated Mesolithic context.
Ah, okay. The Mesolithic, that's that critical time, isn't it? Bridging the hunter-gatherer world and the start of farming, the Neolithic?
Exactly. And our understanding of the symbolic world of people in this region during that transition, it's been pretty limited. We haven't had much concrete evidence.
Right. Kind of fragmented. So this discovery starts to fill in some gaps, maybe.
That's the hope. It gives us a much-needed glimpse.
Okay. And our information today comes mainly from a detailed scientific paper, I believe, published in Archaeological Research in Asia.
That's right. That plus some of the initial news reports that came out when the discovery was announced.
Got it. So for everyone listening, what we want to do is unpack what this little figurine might tell us about that pivotal moment in human history. Does it fit what we thought we knew? Does it challenge it?
Yeah, we're looking beyond just what it is, the object itself, and trying to get at the meaning. What might it have represented to the people who made and used it?
Okay, let's set the scene then. Damjili Cave. Where is it exactly? And what's the background? Has it been studied before?
Right, so Damjili Cave is in western Azerbaijan. It's near the middle part of the Kura River. And location-wise, it's up in the northern foothills of the Lesser Caucasus Mountains, about 650 meters above sea level.
Okay, and you mentioned the Kura River Valley is known for later Neolithic sites.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. There's quite a dense cluster of later Neolithic settlements in that general area, so it suggests continued importance.
And the cave itself? New discovery.
Not the cave, no. It was actually first identified and quite extensively excavated back in the 1950s.
Oh, okay.
Those early digs showed occupations spanning the Middle, Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic. But the problem was those excavations mostly dealt with layers that were disturbed. Mixing,
Ah, so the context was lost. You couldn't be sure what belonged with what.
pretty much. But then, more recently, between 2016 and 2023, a joint Azerbaijani-Japanese team went back,
Right.
and they focused on the eastern end of the cave, areas the original excavators hadn't touched. And that's where they hit the jackpot, archaeologically speaking.
Undisturbed layers.
Exactly. Well-defined stratified deposits, including intact Mesolithic layers. That's crucial.
That is crucial, the kind of thing archaeologists live for. So where in that sequence, in those nice, neat layers, did this figurine turn up?
It came from Unit 5.2. That's one of the Mesolithic layers. And this is where the dating is so important. We have 7 radiocarbon dates for this unit.
7. That's pretty solid.
Very solid. And they place Unit 5.2, and therefore the figurine, right around 6400 to 6100 Cal BC.
Wow. That's precise for that far back. So late Mesolithic then.
Very late Mesolithic, yeah. The whole Mesolithic sequence in the cave seems to run from about 6500 down to 6000 BC,
Right.
and then the Neolithic follows. So this is right at the tail end of the Mesolithic there.
Right on the cusp of change. And who actually found it? Always nice to know who made the discovery.
It was found by Ovia Safarova. She's a researcher at the Enes Institute of Archaeology and Anthropology in Azerbaijan.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've got the where, the when, the who. Let me get to the what. Describe this figurine for us. What does it actually look like?
Okay, so imagine a small piece of hard sandstone. It's elongated, about 51 millimeters long, so maybe 2 inches, and about 15 millimeters wide.
Tiny then.
Pretty small, yeah. It's got an oval cross-section.
Mm-hmm.
And the thinking is it was probably just a naturally shaped river pebble that someone picked up.
So the stone itself wasn't heavily modified.
Doesn't seem like it.
Yeah.
Apart from the engravings, there's no sign they intentionally shaped the pebble itself.
Yeah.
The engravings are what make it special. They seem to depict the human figure.
Engravings. Okay, tell us about those. What details can we see?
Well, one side is flatter and has more detail, so that's considered the front. At the top, what's interpreted as the head, there are these vertical lines, short ones.
Like hair.
That's the interpretation, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe representing short hair, like bangs. And interestingly, these vertical lines are cut off at the bottom by horizontal lines.
Defined, like a hairstyle.
Exactly. And then right at the very top of the head, there's a little area left blank, unengraved, and it's circled by maybe 2 or 3 rough lines.
Like a headband? Or cap, maybe?
Could be. A hairband or the edge of some kind of cap. What's really striking, though, is the complete lack of facial features. No eyes, no nose, no mouth depicted.
That is interesting. Very abstract in a way. What about the body?
Less detail there. About 2/5 of the way up from the bottom, there are 3 horizontal lines going across. They're calling that a belt.
The belt, okay.
And then right from the middle of that belt on the front side, a bunch of vertical lines run downwards. They stop just short of the bottom edge.
And what's the thinking there? Clothing.
Yeah, thought to be maybe a loincloth or some kind of apron-like garment.
You mentioned something about how the lines end differently. Between the hair and this apron thing.
Yeah, it's a subtle point, but potentially meaningful. The hairlines, the vertical ones, they stop abruptly at those horizontal lines, right?
Right.
But the vertical lines of this supposed apron, they seem to just sort of fade out towards the bottom, less defined.
Interesting detail. Okay, the big question with figures like this. Can we tell if it's male or female?
Well, the researchers are very clear on this. There is absolutely no representation of sex characteristics. No genitals, no breasts, no emphasized buttocks, nothing.
So completely indeterminate.
Exactly. We just can't say based on the depiction.
It's amazing how much detail they could pack onto such a small stone, and yet how much is left unsaid, you know? So beyond just looking at it, what kind of science did they bring to bear on this?
They use a few non-destructive techniques, which is good. Didn't want to damage it, obviously. First up was computed tomography CT scans.
Like a medical CT scan?
Pretty much the same idea, yeah. It gave them a really detailed 3D model. That let them examine the engraving super closely, much better than just by eye.
And what did that show? Did it reveal anything unexpected?
It showed variations in the lines. Some were deeper, some wider, some really faint. The common engraving, broad engraving, and light engraving, they called it.
Why the variation? Just tricky working on a small, curved stone.
That's likely part of it, yeah. Working on that surface, maybe the tool getting dull, or maybe the engraver just paid more or less attention to certain parts. They did note the engravings on the front of the head seemed the most carefully done.
Again, focus on the head.
Yeah.
Okay, what else?
Then they did PXRF. That's portable X-ray fluorescence.
Right. That tells you the elements present.
Exactly. They used that to look into this light reddish-brown color on the surface. It was a bit more noticeable at the ends of the figurine.
Reddish. Could that be pigment, like ochre?
That was the question. Ochre contains iron oxides. So they compared the elemental makeup to a known pigment-grinding stone stick from a much later site, a Chalcolithic one.
And what did the comparison show?
The PXRF found higher concentrations of iron in those reddish areas on the Damjili figurine compared to the non-reddish parts.
So maybe pigment?
Maybe.
Yeah.
But there were two possibilities. Either is leftover red pigment, or it could just be that those parts of the sandstone naturally had a bit more iron in them.
Right. The stone itself, how do you tell the difference?
That's where the next technique came in. Scanning electron microscopy, SEM, super high magnification, looking for actual microscopic pigment particles, or maybe adhesives used to stick pigment on.
Okay, the microscopic detective work. Did they find the smoking gun, the pigment particles?
Well, this is interesting. No, they didn't find any clear evidence of pigment particles or adhesives on the Damjili figurine itself.
Oh.
Which was unlike the comparison stone stick, where they did see stuff adhering to it. But, and this is a big but, the researchers point out the figurine was washed after excavation.
So any loose surface stuff could have just been washed away.
Exactly. So the reddish color is intriguing, and they did find a lump of pigment, like ochre, in the same archaeological layer, Unit 5.2.
Okay.
But it wasn't right next to the figurine, and crucially, there were no grinding stones found right with the figurine that would suggest it was being used to process pigment at that spot.
So the pigment connection is suggestive but not proven, and the idea it was a pigment grinder seems unlikely for now.
That seems to be the conclusion, yeah. The evidence just isn't quite there for that specific function.
Okay, so we have this unique, well-dated Mesolithic figurine. Let's talk significance. Why is this single object considered so important in the bigger picture?
Well, several reasons pile up. First, like we said, it's the absolute first Mesolithic human figurine found in the Middle Kur Valley. And that valley is key for understanding the later Neolithic Shungda Tepe culture.
Right, so getting a baseline from the preceding Mesolithic is huge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And second, it seems to be really rare. They looked at other known Mesolithic sites nearby, in Armenia, Georgia, the North Caucasus.
And nothing similar.
Nothing really comparable. Sites like Damjili Cave, Lernagog, Bavra Ablari, chalk important Mesolithic sites, but no figurines quite like this one has turned up.
So it's not just the first in the valley. It might be unique to this specific cultural expression.
It certainly looks that way for now. Now, there are other Mesolithic figures in the broader region, the Gobustan ones.
Ah, yes, the rock carvings and figurines from Gobustan on the Caspian coast. How does this compare?
Quite different, actually. The Gobustan Venus figures are usually made on flattish stones, not these elongated pebbles. And they tend to be, well, less detailed in the engraving compared to the Damjili one.
Different materials, different styles.
Suggesting different regional artistic traditions within the Mesolithic, yeah. Damjili might represent an inland South Caucasus tradition, distinct from coastal Gobustan.
Okay. Now, the really big comparison. How does this late Mesolithic figure stack up against the Neolithic figurines that come later in the same area, the Middle Kura?
And this is where the differences are really stark. It's quite dramatic, actually.
How so?
Well, think about the typical Neolithic clay figurines from that region. They're often shown seated. The Damjili figure seems to be standing.
Okay.
Posture. The Neolithic ones frequently have very clear female characteristics, breasts, buttocks. The Damjili one, as we said, has none.
Right, indeterminate sex.
Even the hair seems different. This short, maybe bob style on the Damjili figure versus other styles seen later. And things like decoration, the Neolithic ones often have incised lines, dots, maybe tattoos or paint.
Yeah.
Completely absent on the Damjili figurine. But conversely, the Damjili one has that loincloth or apron depiction, which isn't really a feature of the Neolithic ones from around there.
Wow. That's a lot of differences. It's not just, oh, one stone, one's clay, is it?
The researchers argue strongly that it's much more than just the material difference. They suggest these contrasts point towards a real break, a discontinuity in how humans were represented in portable art between the Mesolithic and Neolithic in the Middle Kura Valley.
A discontinuity. That's a strong claim. Like, one tradition doesn't just morph into the next, it's replaced by something quite different.
That seems to be the implication for this specific type of art, yes.
When do those typical Neolithic clay figures really show up in the Middle Kura? Was it right at the start of the Neolithic?
The evidence actually suggests no. The widespread making and use of those classic clay female figurines seem to be more characteristic of the late Neolithic phase there.
Late Neolithic, not early.
Early Neolithic sites in the region, like Hakigal Alamzanlan Tepe or Kisik Tepe, they haven't really yielded reliable examples. There's maybe one very early clay object from Hakil among Zanonepe, but it looks very different from the later standard type.
So this unique Mesolithic figurine appears, chronologically, before the common Neolithic type really takes hold.
Exactly, which fits that idea of discontinuity, or at least a significant shift.
But was everything discontinuous? Were there any symbolic things that did carry over from Mesolithic to early Neolithic?
Ah, good question. And yes, interestingly, there seems to be some continuity elsewhere. While the human figurines changed dramatically, they found perforated pendants made from wild boar tusks.
Okay.
Those are found in the Mesolithic layers at Damjili, and they also show up at early Neolithic sites like Hakas, Elangsanla Tepe, and Mentesh Tepe.
So that tradition carried on, at least for a while.
It seems so, but then those seem to disappear in the later Neolithic. There are also similar perforated animal teeth at other early Neolithic sites and even bear-tooth pendants from Kosciusz Kuld in Georgia that look like they continue Mesolithic traditions.
So it's complicated. Some things change drastically, like the human figures, while other adornments or symbolic items show more continuity, at least initially.
Precisely. It paints a much more nuanced picture of cultural transition than just a simple replacement.
What does all this mean for the bigger picture, then? How does this discovery affect our understanding of how the Neolithic unfolded in the South Caucasus?
Well, it strongly supports something called the staging hypothesis.
Staging hypothesis.
Yeah, the idea that the Neolithic package, farming, pottery, village life, new symbolic systems, all that stuff, often thought to originate in Southwest Asia, didn't just arrive all at once.
Ah, it came in stages, piece by piece.
Exactly. Introduced over time, possibly interacting with and being adapted by the local Mesolithic populations. This unique figurine appearing before the typical Neolithic ones fits that model perfectly. It suggests a local Mesolithic symbolic world existed, and the Neolithic figurine tradition arrived later as part of that staged process.
That makes sense. It wasn't just an overnight switch.
Seems unlikely.
Yeah.
And the discovery also highlights something else practical. The engravings on this figurine are quite faint. It really underscores the need for archaeologists to look very carefully at small, seemingly plain stone artifacts from this period. How many similar pieces might have been missed in the past because the markings weren't obvious?
Good point. You have to really look. So what's the hope going forward? More digging.
Definitely more careful excavation and analysis. The hope is that more examples of Mesolithic portable art will eventually be found in the South Caucasus.
To flesh out the picture.
Exactly. More finds would give us a much better handle on this whole Mesolithic-Neolithic transition in the region and how it connects to broader changes happening across Southwest Asia and even beyond.
So this one little stone figure really opens up a lot of questions and potential answers.
It really does. It's a small object with potentially big implications.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. Our deep dive today into the Damjili figurine, it really gives us this incredibly valuable, unique snapshot of the symbolic world in the South Caucasus right at the end of the Mesolithic.
Yeah, it shows us a distinct artistic tradition for representing humans, one that seems to have been largely replaced, or at least significantly altered, by the incoming Neolithic practices, especially when we look at those later clay figurines.
Which leaves us with a great question for everyone listening to think about. What does this appearance and then apparent disappearance of this specific kind of Mesolithic art tell us about how cultures change and interact, especially during these massive shifts like the move to agriculture?
And what other subtle clues might still be out there, buried in the ground, waiting to tell us more about what these ancient people believed and how they saw their world? Are we missing other faint engravings, other small symbols?
Makes you think, doesn't it? If you want to explore this more, definitely look up the Archaeological Research in Asia journal article about this find, or search for Damjili Cave, the Mesolithic-Neolithic transition in the Caucasus, or the Shumu Tepe culture. Lots to dig into.
Well, thank you for joining us on this journey back in time. Discoveries like the Damjili figurine are constant reminders that the story of our past is still being written piece by piece, and it just keeps getting more fascinating.